Pay attention to this CCTV footage. At around 2:20 p.m., a man walking alone near Artillery Place, close to the Royal Artillery Barracks, casual clothes, a small bag over his shoulder, and a calm, steady pace. Nothing that would raise suspicion, but this wasn't just any passerby. This was Lee Rigby, a serving British Army soldier off duty and making his way back to his barracks, completely unaware of the danger, watching him from the shadows.
The last text that he sent me was actually on Mother's Day. That he sent me that text. Well, he did go through some upset in his life, and he always turned to his mum. He was always on the phone to mum, you know, crying, but we'd all end up laughing in the end. You know, it was a special bond, definitely mother-son bond. You know, it always was.
The man was Lee Rigby, a 25-year-old serving soldier in the British Army. He was a Fusilier with the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers and had previously served in Afghanistan. On that day, he was off duty and returning to his barracks. CCTV footage later reviewed by investigators showed him approaching the junction calmly. Other pedestrians appeared briefly in the frame and moved on. Nothing in the footage suggested danger or confrontation. Seconds later, a dark-colored vehicle entered the camera's view. The car slowed and adjusted its direction toward the pavement. The movement was sudden and deliberate. The vehicle mounted the curb and struck Lee Rigby with force, knocking him to the ground. CCTV cameras from nearby locations captured the incident from different angles. Investigators later synchronized these recordings to establish an exact timeline. The footage showed no attempt by the driver to brake or avoid impact. After the vehicle stopped, two men exited. Instead of fleeing, they remained at the scene. CCTV footage showed them standing near Lee Rigby's body, while members of the public moved away. Witnesses later reported that the attackers appeared calm and deliberate. The men were later identified as Michael Adabalasho and Michael Adabawale, both British citizens. Emergency calls were made almost immediately. Witnesses reported a deliberate attack and expressed concern that the situation was ongoing. Some bystanders recorded video footage on mobile phones. These recordings were later collected by police and preserved as evidence.
Many ayat throughout the Quran that we must fight them as they fight us. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. I apologize that women had to witness this today, but in our land, our women have to see the same. You people will never be safe. Remove your government. They don't care about you.
Due to the nature of the incident, armed police units were dispatched to the scene. Emergency medical services arrived shortly afterward. Lee Rigby was pronounced dead at the scene. Police established a large cordon around Artillery Place and surrounding streets. Traffic was diverted, nearby buildings were secured, and the area was treated as a major crime scene. Forensic officers began documenting the location through photographs, measurements, and evidence collection. Later that day, Lee Rigby's parents were informed in person by police officers. Authorities confirmed that their son had been killed in a violent public attack near his place of work. The family later released a statement acknowledging Lee Rigby's military service and expressing grief over his death.
The last text that he sent me was actually on Mother's Day. That he sent me that text. Well, he did go through some upset in his life, and he always turned to his mum. He was always on the phone to mum, you know, crying, but we'd all end up laughing in the end. You know, it was a special bond, definitely mother-son bond. You know, it always was.
Official photographs of Lee Rigby in uniform were released to confirm his identity and prevent misinformation. Within hours, the Metropolitan Police Counterterrorism Command assumed control of the investigation. Based on witness statements, suspect behavior, and the location of the attack, the killing was formally classified as a terrorist incident. This designation allowed investigators to apply counterterrorism legislation and coordinate with national intelligence agencies. CCTV footage became central to the investigation. Analysts gathered recordings from traffic cameras, retail shops, residential buildings, and public transport systems. Each clip was logged, time-stamped, and synchronized. This allowed investigators to reconstruct the movements of the suspects before, during, and after the attack. The footage showed the vehicle entering Woolwich and circling the area before the incident. Automatic number plate recognition systems were used to trace the vehicle. The car's movements were tracked across multiple locations earlier that day. Investigators confirmed that the suspects traveled together and deliberately drove to Woolwich. The location of the attack, near a military barracks, was determined not to be random. Witness statements were taken from members of the public who had been present at the scene.
We have killed this man today is because Muslims are dying daily by British soldiers. And this British soldier is an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth.
These statements were compared with CCTV footage to ensure accuracy. Investigators focused on establishing sequence, timing, and suspect behavior. Physical evidence recovered from the scene was sent for forensic analysis. Armed police confronted the suspects at the scene shortly after the attack. According to police reports, both suspects advanced toward officers while holding weapons. Armed officers discharged their firearms, injuring both men. The use of force was later reviewed independently and ruled lawful. Both suspects were arrested at the scene and taken into custody. The suspects were transported to hospital under armed guard. Police maintained continuous supervision while medical treatment was provided. During this time, investigators began securing warrants to search properties associated with both men. These searches were conducted later that day, and in the following days, multiple addresses linked to the suspects were searched. Police seized mobile phones, computers, storage devices, documents, and clothing. These items were sent to forensic laboratories for analysis. Digital forensic teams examined internet history, communications, and downloaded materials to determine planning and motivation. Investigators confirmed that both suspects had consumed extremist material online. Analysis of electronic devices indicated ideological motivation rather than spontaneous action. Communications data was reviewed to assess whether others were involved. No evidence emerged that the attack was directed by an organized group, though concerns were raised about prior warning signs. Once medically cleared, both suspects were transferred to secure police facilities. They were interviewed separately under caution in accordance with UK counterterrorism law. The interviews were recorded in full. During questioning, both men admitted their involvement in the killing.
We decided to wait in the vicinity of the barracks that is in Woolwich. By the qadr of Allah, by Allah's decree, whilst waiting to find a soldier, because between us we decided that the soldier is the most fair target because he joins the army with kind of an understanding that your life is at risk when you join the army, you know. So we sat in wait, and it just so happened that he was the soldier that was spotted first.
Investigators focused on intent, preparation, and ideological motivation. At the same time, intelligence agencies conducted internal reviews to assess previous contact between the suspects and security services. These reviews were kept separate from the criminal investigation to avoid affecting the judicial process. The focus remained on building a legally sound prosecution case. Public reaction intensified as details emerged. The killing of a serving soldier in a public street during daylight hours caused widespread concern across the country. Media coverage was continuous. Police increased patrols near military sites and public spaces. Government officials issued statements condemning the attack and urging calm. By the end of the first week, investigators had assembled a comprehensive case file. CCTV footage, forensic evidence, witness, testimony, digital records, and admissions made during interrogation formed the foundation of the prosecution case. The suspects were formally charged under terrorism legislation, marking the transition from investigation to prosecution, following the formal charging of Michael Adebolasho and Michael Adebowale under terrorism legislation. The case entered a new phase centered on judicial process and public accountability. The Crown Prosecution Service reviewed the evidence gathered during the investigation and confirmed that the killing met the legal threshold for a terrorist act. Prosecutors determined that the attack was intended to advance an ideological cause and to influence public opinion, through violence. The charges reflected this assessment and carried the most severe penalties available under UK law. Security arrangements were significantly heightened ahead of the trial. Due to the nature of the offense and the level of public interest, the proceedings were scheduled at the Old Bailey, the Central Criminal Court of England and Wales. Court access was restricted, and security screening was extensive. The presence of armed police was increased both inside and outside the court building. Media organizations from the UK and abroad applied for accreditation, reflecting the international attention the case had attracted. As the trial began, the prosecution outlined the sequence of events supported by CCTV footage, forensic analysis, and witness testimony. Jurors were presented with synchronized video evidence showing the moments before, during, and after the attack. The footage demonstrated the deliberate use of the vehicle as a weapon and the actions of the defendants immediately afterward. Prosecutors emphasized that the attack occurred in daylight in a public space and without provocation. Medical experts testified regarding the cause of Lee Rigby's death. Their findings confirmed that the injuries were consistent with a deliberate and sustained attack. The prosecution argued that the content accessed by the defendants demonstrated ideological intent and supported the classification of the killing as terrorism. The court was shown how this material aligned with statements made by the defendants during police interviews. Witnesses who had been present at the scene testified under oath. Their accounts described the behavior of the defendants and the immediate aftermath of the attack. Police officers involved in the armed response detailed the events leading to the arrest, including the decision to use lethal force. The Independent Police Complaints Commission later reviewed this use of force and concluded that it was lawful and proportionate. The defense did not dispute that the defendants carried out the killing. Instead, arguments focused on background, influence, and responsibility. The defense questioned the extent to which the defendants' actions were directed by ideology versus personal grievance. The court also heard limited evidence about prior interactions between the defendants and security services, though this was carefully controlled to avoid prejudicing the jury. Throughout the trial, public reaction remained intense. News coverage was continuous, and commentary extended beyond the courtroom into broader discussions about extremism, public safety, and intelligence oversight. Vigils and memorial events were held in Lee Rigby's memory. At the same time, police monitored community tensions to prevent retaliatory incidents or disorder. Political leaders addressed the case in public statements, emphasizing the need for unity and the rule of law. Government agencies announced reviews into counterterrorism strategies and preventive programs. These reviews examined whether existing systems had been sufficient to identify and manage individuals at risk of committing violent acts. Officials stressed that these inquiries were separate from the criminal proceedings and would not affect the outcome of the trial. As the trial progressed, the jury was instructed to focus solely on the evidence presented in court. The judge emphasized the importance of impartiality and warned against influence from media coverage. After hearing all evidence and closing arguments, the jury retired to deliberate. The deliberations lasted several hours, reflecting the seriousness of the charges and the volume of evidence. The jury returned to unanimous guilty verdicts against both defendants. The court accepted the verdicts and sentencing proceedings were scheduled. During sentencing, the judge described the killing as premeditated, deliberate, and intended to advance extremist beliefs. The judge stated that the attack was designed to intimidate the public and undermine social order. Michael Adabalasho was sentenced to life imprisonment with a whole life order, meaning he would never be eligible for release. Michael Adabalasho was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 45 years before eligibility for parole. The judge stated that these sentences reflected the gravity of the crime and the threat posed by the defendants. Following sentencing, Lee Rigby's family issued a statement acknowledging the outcome of the trial. They expressed gratitude to those who had supported them and reiterated that no sentence could undo their loss. In the months and years after the trial, the case continued to influence policy discussions. Reviews of intelligence handling examined whether earlier interventions might have prevented the attack. Changes were proposed to improve information sharing and monitoring of individuals considered at risk. The case was cited in training materials for law enforcement and emergency response planning. CCTV footage from the Woolwich attack became a reference point in studies of urban security and surveillance. Analysts noted how rapidly evidence was preserved and used to identify suspects. The case demonstrated both the capabilities and limitations of surveillance systems in preventing acts of violence. For the public, the case underscored the reality that acts of terrorism can occur in ordinary settings. For law enforcement, it reinforced the importance of rapid response, evidence coordination, and judicial process. For Lee Rigby's family, it marked the conclusion of a legal journey that followed an irreversible loss. The criminal proceedings concluded with life sentences imposed on both defendants. The court affirmed that the punishment reflected the seriousness of the offense and the intent behind it. The judicial process reached its end, and justice has been served.